So in the past, we've talked about the LAAT gunship, specifically the LAAT-I, which was utilized by the Republic during the Clone Wars. It was arguably one of the most effective gunships in Star Wars history, and an iconic piece of military equipment, basically symbolizing to many people the Clone Wars themselves. So I figured today we could talk about the variant that saw much less battlefield action but had a much longer career, the LAAT-LE, the law enforcement variant of the LAAT. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, we're all familiar with the LAAT, and we've all seen the LAAT-LE, even if we know it by other names or don't know it by any name at all. It's this special variant of the LAAT that we see used in the streets of Coruscant and in the underworld. It shares almost no similarities with its battlefield counterpart, and yet bears the same name. It was designed off of very similar plans, and we can see some very similar use cases for it. So I figured maybe we could talk a little bit about how this vehicle was utilized by its various users during the course of its history, and how it works. But like all vehicle videos, let's start off with the numbers. Like the LAAT-I, the LAAT-LE was designed by Rothana Heavy Engineering, who manufactured all of the equipment for the Grand Army of the Republic during the Clone Wars, or at least much of the ground equipment. At 11.5 meters in length, it was much smaller than the LAAT-I, the battlefield variant of the gunship, and was far more maneuverable and nimble as a result, which makes it perfect for urban environments. As for armament, it was much less armed than the LAAT that we see on the battlefields, being armed with primarily a pair of turreted laser cannons mounted to the chin of the vehicle, a single tail-mounted laser cannon for engaging pursuers, and a pair of missile launchers which could fire heavier munitions if need be. Now, these weren't used very often during the days of the Republic, but were used far more prominently by the Empire once they came to power. As for crew, they were designed to work with only a crew of 2, a pilot and a gunner, much like many other gunships, but they could carry a small number of law enforcement officers or troopers depending on what the situation required. These would be stored in a small bay in the back and exit through doors on the side, just like the battlefield LAAT. So these were originally designed for the police forces on Coruscant. That was their original customer, and during the introduction of these vehicles, it's the only place you would see them, as flying among the streets of Coruscant. They were designed to operate in the lower cities. They had built-in searchlights and such, which allowed them to operate in low-light conditions, which were almost necessary to run a police force on Coruscant, a city that, first off, spans an entire planet, but also runs deep enough that the lower levels almost never receive sunlight at all. But as it entered service with law enforcement on Coruscant, it quickly gained the attention of both the Jedi and the Coruscant Guard, the elite group of clone troopers tasked with protecting Coruscant. Now, it still remained on the Republic capital, and as far as we know, during the Clone Wars, never left the Republic capital, but it was a pretty common sight by the end of the war among law enforcement officers and the Coruscant Guard, seeing deployments pretty readily by the end of the war on the Republic capital. But as the Republic fell and the Empire came to power, all of this changed. The vehicle was renamed from the LAAT-LE to the Imperial Patrol Gunship and found much wider use. The Empire, after all, really wanted to focus on controlling a civilian population, and how better to do that than a small, fast, light, nimble gunship that already kind of matches your aesthetic, that is really only known as a Republic gunship on Coruscant. So it could be deployed as a new Imperial vehicle basically everywhere else, and as such, that's basically exactly what happened. As the Empire came to power, they pushed these to every corner of the galaxy, and these, even within the Imperial military, kind of replaced the LAATs that the Republic used on the battlefield variant of the LAAT. Not entirely, but they did partially replace them. In their role as an Imperial patrol gunship, they would find their way into every corner of the galaxy, even being stationed on board some Star Destroyers for use in boarding operations, landing operations, and even escorting freighters in to dock with these Star Destroyers. On Imperial-controlled worlds all across the galaxy, from the core all the way out to Lothal, they were a prominent part of Imperial policing operations and were present in many Imperial actions on most of these worlds. As a result, they ended up playing a pretty big role in the build-up to and the events of the Galactic Civil War, taking part in battles and police operations all across the galaxy. We see them in Andor and in Rebels, and in the days after the war in Ahsoka and The Mandalorian. They were present in both factions by the time of the Battle of Jakku, with the New Republic having inherited a bunch of them from the Empire, and continuing to use them where they saw fit. As the Empire fell following the Battle of Jakku, many of these fell into the hands of Imperial remnants, and many more fell into the hands of the New Republic. And unlike most other Imperial vehicles, the New Republic continued to utilize the patrol gunship in their own operations, even though it was still technically named the Imperial Patrol Gunship. We see these being used by Coruscanti police officers during arrests on Coruscant and on Corellia. And now, at this point in time, that's as far through the timeline as we know they go, but it's likely they go at least a little bit farther. Now, I think it's kind of doubtful that these would still be around during the days of the First Order. I think there's probably a few surplus ones lying around, but they're likely not in mainstream use anymore. But that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them coming up in the events of the Mando and Grogu movie, and some of the events surrounding Thrawn's return, where things are more or less at the point where we know they're already in use by several factions. So we could see these quite a bit more in the coming years. So it's kind of fascinating that this gunship that was originally designed for the Republic, specifically for police on Coruscant, would become known as an iconic gunship of Imperial military forces, but not the only troop ship used by the Empire during their reign. If you'd like to learn about the Sentinel-class landing craft, a sort of troop-based variant of the Lambda-class shuttle, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments what you think of this little gunship. Do you think the Republic should have just used the LAAT-Is in a policing role, or do you think it makes sense to build a smaller, nimbler version of it for use in urban areas like on Coruscant? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.